She was on the kitchen floor, 8 months pregnant, cheek burning, one hand pressed flat against the cold marble. And the only sound in the house was the front door clicking shut behind the man who had just walked away. He didn't call. Not that night. Not once. He didn't know she had driven herself to the emergency room alone. He didn't know she had checked into a hotel under a name she had buried for 3 years. He didn't know that name was Ashworth. And he absolutely did not know that the company quietly funding his entire career, the deal he had spent 4 years building, the project that was supposed to make him somebody, belonged to her family. He thought he had married a quiet woman who would serve wine to his mistress and apologize for existing. He had no idea who he had actually married, and by the time he found out, it was already too late. Lesson statement. Sometimes the woman a man underestimates is the very foundation he has been standing on all along. Meaning and value. This is a story about what happens when a woman stops making herself small. It is about the quiet power of knowing who you are, even when someone has spent years convincing you to forget. If you have ever felt invisible in a place where you gave everything, this story is for you. If this story moves something in you, drop a comment below and tell us, because the right stories find the right people at exactly the right time. And if you believe someone else needs to hear this today, share it with them. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. We read every single comment, every one.
The crack of a palm against skin. Then silence. Then a wine glass rolling slowly across the kitchen tile, turning once, twice, until it stopped against the baseboard with a small final click. Caroline Whitfield was on the floor. Her left cheek was burning. Her right hand was pressed flat against the cold marble, and she was doing something that surprised even herself. She was not screaming. She was not crying. She was counting. 1, 2, 3. There she is. The baby moved. She is okay. 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 Get up, Caroline. The kitchen smelled like the dinner she had spent 4 hours preparing. Roasted chicken. Rosemary. A good burgundy that Garrett had selected, and she had opened and poured and carried to the table without once being thanked for any of it. The overhead light was still on. That warm amber light she had chosen herself when they renovated 2 years ago. She had stood in the lighting showroom for 40 minutes to get that exact shade of warm. She had wanted the kitchen to feel like a home. She pressed her palm harder against the marble and pushed herself up, slowly, carefully. Her stomach was enormous. 8 months of growing person, shifting its weight as she moved. She got one knee under her, then the other foot. She stood. Garrett was gone. The front door had not slammed. It had clicked. That small, controlled sound was somehow the worst part. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, not moving. Her apron, the one she had bought at a farmer's market on their 2nd anniversary, cream-colored, with a small embroidered bee near the pocket, was still tied around her waist. She untied it with steady hands. She folded it over the back of a chair. She was thinking very clearly. That was the strange part. She had expected panic or rage or collapse. Instead, she was thinking, bathroom, cold cloth, check the mark, then decide what to do next. She walked to the downstairs bathroom. She turned on the light. She looked at herself in the mirror. The mark was there, not terrible yet. By morning, it would be a full map of tonight. She turned on the cold tap. She pressed a washcloth to her cheek and held it there and looked at herself in the mirror and thought about the last 3 hours. The dinner had been Garrett's idea. Clifford Pruitt, his business associate on the Hartwell project, had been invited weeks ago. Caroline had planned the menu, ordered the groceries, cooked everything from scratch. That was normal. That was always normal. What was not normal, what had not been mentioned until Clifford rang the doorbell, was Sloane Mercer standing behind him on the front steps, wearing a red dress and a smile that knew exactly what it was doing. Garrett's colleague, That was the word he used. Colleague. Caroline had looked at Sloane. She had looked at Garrett. She had said nothing because Clifford Pruitt was standing right there extending a bottle of wine and saying something about the house. And this was not the moment. And Caroline was very good at identifying when a moment was not the moment. She had been very good at that for 3 years. Dinner had been pleasant on the surface. Clifford was charming in the way of men who needed things from other men. Sloane had laughed a little too readily at everything Garrett said, and Garrett had sat at the head of the table with an ease he only had when he was performing for an audience. Caroline had been in and out of the kitchen, serving, clearing, keeping glasses full. Then Garrett had reached for the wine bottle and said, very casually, without looking at her, "Caroline, pour for Sloane first." It was a small thing, the kind of small thing she had been absorbing and absorbing and absorbing for 3 years, each one individually weightless, collectively a stone around her neck. Pour for Sloane first. Not because Sloane was a guest, because Garrett wanted to see if she would do it. Because Garrett wanted to show Sloane that she would do it. Caroline had looked at the wine bottle in her hand. She had looked at Sloane's expression, that small, waiting smile. She had set the bottle down on the table. "I think everyone can reach the bottle just fine," she had said, pleasantly, without heat. Clifford Pruitt had laughed nervously. Sloane's smile had widened by a fraction. Garrett's jaw had gone tight. That was it. That was the whole crime. After dinner, after Clifford and Sloane had gone, after Caroline had cleared every plate and washed every glass alone, while Garrett sat in the living room with his phone, he had followed her into the kitchen. He had leaned in the doorway. He had told her, very quietly, that she had embarrassed him. She had said, "I'm 8 months pregnant, Garrett. I'm not your waitress." And he had crossed the room in 3 steps and hit her. She pressed the cold cloth harder against her cheek. The baby moved again, a slow, rolling shift, like a cat turning over in sleep. "I'm here," Caroline thought. "I know. I'm here." She stood there for a long time, with the cloth against her face. The house was completely silent. She listened to it. She counted the sounds she could not hear. No footsteps coming back. No key in the lock. No phone buzzing with a text. No voice from the other room saying anything at all. He had left. He had hit her and left, and the house was as quiet as it had ever been. She picked up her phone from the bathroom counter where she'd left it before dinner. She stared at the screen. She almost called her grandmother. Her thumb found the contact, Dorothy, and hovered there. She thought about that voice, smooth and steady and completely unshockable. She thought about what she would have to say to make Dorothy understand. She put the phone face down on the counter. Not yet. She was not ready to say it out loud, because saying it out loud would make it real. And if it was real, all of it was real. The last 3 years. The silences that had gotten longer and heavier. The way Garrett looked at her, sometimes like she was a piece of furniture that had been moved to the wrong room. The way she had talked herself out of every feeling she had ever had that contradicted the story she told herself about her marriage. She opened her phone again. She called a car service. She asked them to bring a car to the house in 15 minutes. Then she went upstairs and packed a bag. She did not pack dramatically. She was methodical. Clothes for a week. Toiletries. The small velvet pouch where she kept her mother's ring, which she had taken off 3 months into the pregnancy because her fingers had swollen, her laptop, her insurance cards. The folder in the bottom drawer of her nightstand where she kept the documents that mattered. She had not known until she reached for that folder that some part of her had been preparing for this for a long time. She carried the bag downstairs. She put on her coat, which no longer buttoned over her stomach and hadn't for 2 months. She looked around the kitchen once. The wine glass that had rolled across the floor was still against the baseboard. She had not picked it up. She left it there. The car arrived. She got in. The driver did not comment on her face. "Hospital," she said. The emergency entrance. She looked out the window as the car pulled away from the house. The porch light was still on. The amber glow fell across the front steps and the potted rosemary bushes she had planted in October, and it looked exactly like a home. She looked away. Inside her chest, something that had been compressed for a very long time was beginning, slowly, to expand. The automatic doors slid open with a soft exhale of warm air. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular tension of a room full of people waiting to find out if something was serious. The fluorescent lights were aggressively bright after the dark car ride. Caroline blinked. The triage nurse looked up. She was somewhere in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and the expression of someone who had seen everything and was still paying attention. She looked at Caroline's face. She looked at Caroline's stomach. She said, "Come on over here, hun." Caroline sat in the chair beside the desk. She answered the questions: name, date of birth, primary complaint. "I fell," Caroline said. "In the kitchen. I tripped." She said it so smoothly that she understood something in real time. She had been rehearsing that sentence without knowing it. She had been keeping it ready, filed away somewhere, for a moment she had told herself would never come. She had known it might come. The nurse wrote something. She did not look up immediately. When she did, her expression was careful and precise and said nothing that could be written down. "Let us get you and baby checked out," she said. "We're going to take good care of you tonight." They moved her to a room. A doctor came. Then Dr. Susan Crane arrived, unhurried, with the specific calm of someone who had learned that panic served no one. She checked the baby first. The heartbeat on the monitor was strong and steady, a fast drumbeat that filled the small room. Caroline closed her eyes for a moment and just listened to it. "Baby sounds perfect," Dr. Crane said. "Strong, active. Let's take a look at you." She examined Caroline's face. She checked her blood pressure. She asked questions in the same measured tone throughout, clinical and careful. Then she asked, "Is there anything you want to tell me about tonight?" Caroline looked at the ceiling. The tiles were the standard hospital white, slightly textured, completely neutral. "I tripped," she said. A long silence filled the room. "Okay," Dr. Crane said. She made a note. "We're going to keep you overnight for observation. Standard protocol with trauma and late-term pregnancy." She paused. "The observation room has a lock on the door. I'll show you where it is." She left. A nurse brought warm blankets. The room settled into its nighttime rhythm. Caroline lay in the hospital bed and picked up her phone. She checked it 3 times. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock, lock. Garrett had not called, had not texted, had not sent a single word into the silence since walking out of the kitchen 45 minutes ago. She did the math, which she had already done and could not stop doing. He knew she wasn't home. Her car was gone, or rather she had taken a car service, but the lights were off, the house was quiet. He had come back at some point and found it empty. He had to have found it empty. He had not called. God, she thought. I was waiting. Even now, lying in a hospital bed, with my face swelling up, I was waiting for him to call. What does that say about me? What does that say about what I became in this marriage? She set the phone face down on the thin blanket. She thought about Beverly, Garrett's mother, Beverly Whitfield, who wore silk blouses to casual dinners and referred to her son's real estate career as his empire. with the absolute sincerity of a woman who had invested her entire identity in his success. Beverly, who had called Caroline a lovely girl in a tone that meant she had expected someone with a better address. Beverly would call in the morning. Caroline knew this with certainty. Beverly would call, and the call would not be about how Caroline was doing. She was right, but Beverly did not wait until morning. The phone buzzed at 11:47 at night. Beverly's name on the screen. Caroline stared at it through 2 full rings. Then she answered. Caroline, Beverly's voice was measured, careful, the voice of a woman who had been briefed. Garrett told me there was an incident. An incident. I hope you understand, Beverly continued, that he is under enormous pressure right now with the Hartwell project. The financing timeline alone is... He hit me, Beverly, Caroline said. The silence on the other end was the loudest thing she had heard all night. I drove myself to the hospital, Caroline said. I am 8 months pregnant, and I drove myself to the emergency room because your son hit me and then left. He did not call. He has not called once. The silence stretched. I'm not crazy, Caroline thought. I know what happened. I have always known the shape of this. I think, Beverly said, very small, very careful, that perhaps you should speak with a lawyer. I already have one, Caroline said. Several, actually. This was not yet true. It would be true by morning. She ended the call. She put the phone on the rolling table beside the bed. She looked at the ceiling. The room was very quiet except for the monitor and the distant sounds of the hospital going about its nighttime business. She thought about the first time Garrett had raised his voice at her. 6 months into the marriage, they had been arguing about something small. She couldn't even remember what. And his voice had gone from frustrated to loud so quickly that she had physically stepped back. He had apologized immediately. He had brought her flowers the next day. She had told Nora it was stress, and Nora had gone quiet. In that specific way she had, when she disagreed but respected your right to be wrong about your own life. She had understood that silence. Even then, she had chosen not to understand it. She thought about the second time, the keys thrown across the room, not at her, near her, the distinction he had maintained with great care afterward. I didn't throw them at you, as if trajectory was the measure of a thing. She thought about Sloane's name, the way it had started appearing in Garrett's stories about work. Sloane said this. Sloane suggested that. Sloane thought the Westport property was overpriced. The way you say a name when you are thinking about someone more often than you are speaking about them. She had asked him once, directly. He had laughed. He had called her hormonal. He had said she was being insecure, that pregnancy was making her irrational, that Sloane was a colleague and nothing more, and he had said it with such patient exasperation that she had apologized. She had actually apologized. I'm not crazy, she thought again. The thought was harder this time, more certain. I know what I saw. I have always known, Doctor. Crane came back at 2 in the morning to check on her. She sat on the edge of the small chair beside the bed for a moment. Baby is doing great, she said. You should try to sleep. I know. Dr. Crane stood to leave. At the door, she paused. She reached into the pocket of her white coat and held out a folded piece of paper. This isn't in your chart, she said quietly. It's just a list, in case you ever need it. Caroline took it. She unfolded it after Dr. Crane left. A domestic violence resource list, a legal hotline, a women's shelter, 3 names of family law attorneys with their direct numbers. She folded it back up. She tucked it into the side pocket of her bag, next to her mother's ring. She lay back against the pillows. The monitor beeped steadily. Outside the window, the parking lot lights were orange and still. She thought about her grandmother for the first time in a long time. Really thought about her. Dorothy Ashworth, who had built something from nothing and then built more from that, who had sat across from Caroline at the dining room table in that enormous house in Connecticut and said words that Caroline had filed away under "do not open." The door doesn't close. That was what Dorothy had said. The last real conversation they'd had before the wedding. Caroline had told her she was getting married. Dorothy had listened. She had said, with the specific care of someone who knows they will not be heard, "When you are ready to come home, you come home. The door doesn't close." Caroline had told herself for 3 years that she hadn't needed to go home, that she had chosen her own life, that love was its own kind of foundation. She looked at the folded piece of paper sticking out of her bag. Somewhere along the way, she thought, I became invisible. I was standing right there, and I became invisible to him. And the worst part, the part she was only now beginning to look at directly, was that she had helped it happen. She had made herself small enough to fit the space he'd left for her. She was done being that small. She did not sleep until nearly 4. When she did, it was with one hand on her stomach and the monitor beeping its steady, perfect rhythm beside her. Rain against a hotel window. The hum of a heating unit cycling on and off. The specific silence of a room where no one knew where you were. Caroline had checked in under her maiden name, Ashworth. She had not planned to. She had simply stood at the front desk after leaving the hospital that afternoon, her bag over one shoulder and her insurance, cards in her hand. And when the clerk asked for her name, she had said it before she thought about it. Ashworth. Carolyn Ashworth. The clerk typed it without looking up, slid the key card across the desk in its small paper sleeve. C. Ashworth, room 412. Caroline had stood there, for a moment, looking at it. 3 years. She had not been C. Ashworth for 3 years. She took the elevator up. She let herself into the room. She sat on the edge of the bed without taking off her coat. The room was generic and clean and completely neutral, which was exactly what she needed. No objects that belonged to anyone. No history. She sat there for a long time. Then, because she could not simply sit, she opened her suitcase and began to reorganize it. She refolded everything. She grouped her toiletries on the bathroom counter by size. She lined up her shoes. She made the already made bed. This took 45 minutes. When she finished, she sat back down, and the problem was exactly as large as it had been, but she could breathe. She was thinking about her grandmother. Dorothy Ashworth had not attended the wedding. This had been smoothed over so many times, with so many different explanations. Dorothy's health, Dorothy's schedule, the timing of the venue, that Caroline had almost succeeded in forgetting what it actually meant. What it actually meant was that Dorothy had looked at Garrett Whitfield and seen something Caroline had refused to see, and she had made the quiet decision that she would not stand in a barn in Vermont and watch her only granddaughter marry it. Caroline had been furious. She had not spoken to Dorothy for almost a year afterward. By the time she had softened, by the time she had driven up to the estate in Connecticut for Christmas 2 years in, the silence between them had calcified into a new kind of normal. They spoke, they had dinners, but the real conversation, the one that needed to happen, had stayed in the room where Dorothy had said, "The door doesn't close," and Caroline had said she didn't need it to be open. She thought about that room now. She thought about what Dorothy had known and not said. She thought about Ashworth Industries. The company had been Dorothy's life's work. One hotel in Charleston in 1971, built with borrowed money and sheer refusal to fail. Then another, then a management company, then acquisitions, expansions, the kind of growth that happens when the person driving it has both the intelligence and the ferocity to refuse every ceiling placed above her. By the time Caroline was born, Ashworth Industries was a diversified holding company with commercial real estate, private equity, and a hospitality portfolio that included 11 luxury properties along the eastern seaboard. Its valuation, at the last formal assessment, was $4.7 billion. Caroline was the only grandchild. Preston, her father, had stepped back from operations 5 years ago following his second divorce and what the family carefully called his period of reassessment. The succession plan, which Dorothy had drawn up and revised and kept current with the care of a woman who understood that power required continuity, named Caroline as primary heir. She had walked away from it, not dramatically, not in a scene. She had simply told Dorothy she was getting married and wanted to build her own life, and Dorothy had said the thing about the door, and Caroline had taken that to mean she had permission to leave. She had not let herself think about what it cost. What it meant to walk away from $4.7 billion and a grandmother who loved her and a father who was trying, in his clumsy way, to be present. She had told herself she was choosing love over legacy. She had believed it because she had needed to believe it. I was so stupid, she thought. Then, catching herself, no, stop, that's not right. I wasn't stupid, I was hopeful. There is a difference. I was hopeful, and he was dishonest, and those are not the same failure. Her phone buzzed. Nora. She answered before it rang twice. Espacio. Where are you? Nora said. A hotel. What hotel? Nora. Tell me the name of the hotel, Caroline. Right now, she told her. 30 minutes later, Nora Voss knocked on the door of room 412 with 2 cups of chamomile tea from the lobby cafe and a container of the shortbread cookies from the bakery near their old apartment, the ones Caroline had eaten by the sleeve during exam weeks in college. Caroline opened the door. Nora looked at her face. Nora looked at her stomach. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she came inside and sat on the bed and handed Caroline a cup of tea. I have been, Nora said, biting my tongue for 3 years. I know, Caroline said. I'm not going to say I told you so. That would be unhelpful and also the least interesting thing I could contribute right now. Thank you. However, Nora set her cup on the nightstand. You are going to have to make a phone call. Caroline knew exactly which call. Not yet, she said. Caroline, one night, Nora. I need one night where I am not an Ashworth, and I am not Garrett's wife, and I am not anyone's anything. Just one night. Nora looked at her for a long moment. Her expression was the particular combination of worry and respect that only very good friends can manage simultaneously. One night, she said, then we call your grandmother. They sat together for a while without talking. The rain was still coming down against the window. The heating unit hummed. Nora refilled Caroline's tea from the little hotel kettle, and neither of them commented on the domesticity of the gesture. It was at 2 a.m. that Caroline could not sleep and opened her laptop. She told herself she was checking her email. She opened the shared calendar she and Garrett had set up in the first year of their marriage. He had added her access and never removed it, had apparently stopped thinking about it. She was looking, dimly, for some evidence of Sloane. Dinner reservations, blocked off evenings, the calendar evidence of a life being lived parallel to their marriage. She found Sloane's name in 2 places. She noted them, without feeling much. She already knew. She was about to close the calendar when she saw the Hartwell Project folder. She opened it, because she was an Ashworth, and Ashworths read documents. The partnership summary was 3 pages. She read all 3. She read the list of capital partners. She read the subsidiary names. She read the third subsidiary name twice. Ashworth Hospitality Group. She sat very still. Ashworth Hospitality Group was a subsidiary of Ashworth Industries. She had grown up hearing that name. It managed 5 of the 11 properties in Dorothy's portfolio. It was not a public company. Its connection to Ashworth Industries required specific knowledge to trace. Garrett did not have that knowledge. He had never asked about the Ashworth side of her life with any real interest. She was certain of this. But Dorothy had that knowledge. Dorothy had every piece of that knowledge. And Dorothy had, at some point in the last 4 years, decided to place Ashworth capital into the project that was funding her granddaughter's husband's career. She had been watching. This whole time. She gave him rope, Caroline thought. She gave him rope, and she watched, and she waited, and now she knows exactly what kind of man he is, because money is the only reliable character test. That was a Dorothy sentence. Word for word, that was something Dorothy had said. Caroline stared at the screen for a long time. She took a deep breath. Then she closed the laptop and put both hands on her stomach and said, softly, in the dark, and the rain, and the hotel quiet, "Your great-grandmother is something else, little one." She sat there for a moment. "I think it's time I remembered who I am." A phone ringing twice, then a voice, measured and unhurried, and completely awake, as if it had been waiting. Picking up at 6:47 in the morning. "I've been expecting your call, Caroline." Dorothy Ashworth had not been surprised by a telephone call in 40 years. Her voice carried the particular stillness of someone who had already run the calculations and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. "I know," Caroline said. "Tell me what happened." So Caroline told her, all of it, the dinner, Sloane, the bottle of wine she had set down, the kitchen floor, the click of the front door, the hospital, Beverly's call, the fold of paper in her bag with the resource list on it. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. Dorothy did not interrupt once. She said, twice, in the way of someone confirming that they are still listening and still computing. When Caroline finished, there was a pause. "How is the baby?" Dorothy said. "She's okay, strong heartbeat. I saw Dr. Crane." "Good. The baby is the first thing." "I know." "You're going to ask me about Hartwell." "Yes." Dorothy was quiet for 3 seconds. When she spoke, her voice was the same temperature it had been at the beginning of the call. "I learned that Garrett Whitfield had married my granddaughter 3 months before the Ashworth Hospitality partnership was finalized. I instructed Miles to proceed with the investment." "You were testing him," Caroline said. "I was observing him. There is a difference. Testing implies I expected failure." A pause. "I expected exactly what occurred." "I'm not angry," Caroline realized. "I should be angry. She was watching my marriage like a business investment, and I should be furious. But I'm not. Because she's right. She has always been right, and she waited for me to be ready." "I should have called sooner," Caroline said. "Yes," Dorothy said, without softening it. "But you're calling now. That's what matters." Miles Hartley joined the show on a separate line. He was the Ashworth family's primary legal counsel, had been for 22 years, and had a voice like a room temperature that never varied. He greeted Caroline and got directly to what he had prepared to say. He had spent, he explained, a portion of the previous evening reviewing documentation that Dorothy had authorized him to compile over the past 18 months. The picture it assembled was detailed and not good. Garrett had been systematically positioning assets in Caroline's name, specifically her personal accounts she had largely ignored because Garrett had taken over the household finances in year 1 of the marriage. citing efficiency. As collateral for Hartwell Development debt, Caroline had $640,000 of debt exposure in her name for a project she had never discussed, never agreed to, and never been informed about. Her name, her credit, her legal existence as a financial entity. Used without her knowledge. Caroline listened to this. She held the phone with one hand and pressed the other flat against the blanket covering her legs. He used me, she thought, not just the way I understood, not just the Sloan way, not just the silences and the managed distance. He used me as a tool. My name was a line item. I deserved better than this. I deserved so much better than every single piece of this. What do we do? She asked. Miles explained with calm precision. A protective order application based on the documented domestic violence incident, divorce filing with full asset documentation, unwinding the debt exposure in her name. All of it could be initiated immediately, pending her authorization. Authorize everything, Caroline said. Nora, across the room, was making tea on the hotel kettle. She was not in the conversation. She had moved to the small desk by the window and was doing the one useful thing available to her in the middle of a legal and financial crisis, which was making sure Caroline had something warm to drink. This small, wordless act made Caroline's throat tighten in a way that 3 hours of difficult conversation had not. There's one more thing, Miles said. Tell me. Garrett has a second mobile device. We have reason to believe he uses it for communications related to both the personal situation and certain business arrangements he has not disclosed to his partners. How do you know that? A pause. We don't directly, but the documentation trail has gaps that are consistent with a second device. If that device's contents became available through legal channels, it would significantly strengthen the protective order application and the financial claims. Caroline thought about Sloan Mercer, standing on her front steps in a red dress. She thought about a woman who had been told for 8 months that the wife knew, that it was an arrangement, that she wasn't breaking anything. She thought about what a woman who had been lied to that comprehensively might do with a phone she happened to have found. I'll see what I can do, she said. Her own phone buzzed on the blanket, Garrett's name on the screen. She held it up so Nora could see it from across the room. Nora raised one eyebrow. Caroline let it ring through to voicemail. She listened to the voicemail afterward, alone, with the volume low. Garrett's voice was measured and practiced. He said he had thought about last night and believed they had both said things they regretted. He said pregnancy hormones were a real and documented phenomenon, and he understood that she was under physical and emotional strain. He said he loved her. He said he hoped she would come home today because he had a dinner with Clifford Pruitt on Thursday that he would like her to attend. Caroline listened to the entire message. When it ended, she put the phone face down on the blanket. She picked up the hotel notepad from the nightstand. She found a pen. She wrote one sentence to herself in her own handwriting because she needed to see it. He does not think he did anything wrong. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took out her phone and sent a text to Miles Hartley. 4 words. Begin documentation of everything. She put the phone down. Nora brought her the tea. She sat on the edge of the bed and didn't ask what the voicemail said, because she could see from Caroline's face that she didn't need to ask. They got dressed and went outside. There was a small park 2 blocks from the hotel. It was early and cold, and the trees were bare, but the structure of them was beautiful. The specific winter architecture of branches, with no leaves to hide behind. A man threw a tennis ball for a golden retriever near the fountain. An older woman sat on a bench, reading with coffee, her coat buttoned to the chin. They walked without talking much. The baby kicked twice hard, against the palm Caroline had pressed to her side. She's kicking, Caroline said. Nora stopped walking and put her hand there without asking permission. They stood like that for a moment on the path, in the cold, with the dog running in the background and the ordinary world going about its morning. When they got back to the hotel, there was a message from Dorothy. Miles will be at your hotel at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I have authorized him to initiate protective proceedings on your behalf. Your trust disbursement has been unlocked, effective this morning. The guest house at the estate is prepared for your arrival whenever you are ready. Come when you're ready, Caroline. The door doesn't close. Caroline read it twice. She handed the phone to Nora. Nora read it. Her expression moved through several things. She handed it back. Your grandmother, she said, is the most terrifying woman alive. Yes, Caroline agreed. I mean that as the highest compliment I am capable of giving. She knows, Caroline said. She has always known. The text from Beverly came at 9:37 in the morning. It was 3 sentences. Garrett had made a decision. He needed space to think. He had asked a friend to stay at the house for a few days. A friend. Beverly's word. Friend. Caroline read the text, standing by the hotel window, with the remains of her breakfast on the small table behind her. She looked out at the gray November street. She thought about the word friend. She thought about the red dress and the smile and 8 months of Sloane's name and conversations about work. She called Beverly back. Beverly picked up on the first ring, which meant she had been waiting. He moved her in, Caroline said. Sloane Mercer. He moved her into my house. He is being impulsive, Beverly said carefully. He is under pressure, and he hit me, Beverly. Caroline's voice was even. She was not going to say it again after this. He hit me while I was 8 months pregnant, and I drove myself to the emergency room alone, and your son has not once called to ask if I or his child are safe. Beverly was quiet. You called me last night to ask me to manage this, Caroline said. To smooth it over, to go home and be the wife who keeps the picture neat. I understand why you called me for that. I understand exactly why. She paused. I'm not that anymore. She ended the call. Miles arrived at 2 o'clock as promised. He came with a leather briefcase and a folder and the particular composure of a man who had seen a great deal and was not interested in adding drama to any of it. He sat across from Caroline at the small table and walked her through the next steps with methodical clarity. The protective order application had been drafted. The divorce filing was prepared. The debt unwinding in her name would require Garrett's cooperation or a court order, and they were pursuing both paths simultaneously. Miles spoke without editorializing. He presented options and asked for decisions, and she made them. She was good at this. She had forgotten, somewhere in 3 years, of managing a household and managing Garrett's moods and managing all the small suppressions of her own competence, that she was good at this. Making decisions from complete information, quickly, without sentimentality. She was an Ashworth. They were built for this. At 4 in the afternoon, her phone rang. The number was unknown. She almost didn't answer. She answered. It's Sloane, said the voice on the other end. Sloane Mercer. Caroline said nothing. She waited. I need to tell you something, Sloane said. I know you have no reason to hear me out. I know that, but I need to tell you something, and then I'll leave you alone. Talk, Caroline said. The silence on the line had a particular texture, the texture of someone who was choosing words very carefully and who had, perhaps, been sitting with those words for longer than they wanted to admit. He told me you knew, Sloane said, about us. From the beginning, he has said it was an arrangement, that you had an understanding, that it was modern, that you both agreed to it. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. He told me you were fine with it, For 8 months, he told me that. He described conversations you supposedly had. He told me you were relieved, actually, because of the pregnancy. Caroline's hand was very tight around the phone. I found out the truth from Beverly, Sloane said, 3 days ago. She called me after she called you. I think she thought telling me would make me... I don't know what she thought, but I looked things up after that. I read the timeline. I understood what I had actually been part of. And I found his second phone. He left it in the kitchen drawer when he went out this morning. I think he forgot it was there. I went through it. A pause. There are things on it that you need. Caroline was quiet for a moment. She thought about two women on a phone who had both loved the same man and both been lied to, in completely different ways, sitting in the wreckage of decisions that were his and not theirs. She did not like Sloane Mercer. She was not going to like Sloane Mercer. But she recognized the exhaustion in her voice, the specific exhaustion of someone who has just understood the shape of the story they were actually in. Email everything to Miles Hartley, Caroline said. His contact information is on the Ashworth Industries website under legal counsel. Okay. And Sloane. Yeah. Leave the house. Today, whatever you decide to do or not do, leave my house. A long pause. Yeah, Sloane said. Okay. The call ended. Caroline set the phone on the table. Miles was watching her with the careful expression of someone who had heard one side of a significant conversation. Sloane Mercer has Garrett's second phone, Caroline said. She's going to email you everything on it. Miles did not alter his expression. He made a note. We'll have it processed by tomorrow morning. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along, Caroline thought. Not about Sloane specifically, not about the phone or the financial arrangements, or the full architecture of his deception, but about the shape of him. I knew the shape of him before I married him, and I chose to believe the outline I preferred. That is over. That is completely and permanently over. The email from Sloane arrived at 7 that evening. Miles called Caroline at 8. The second phone documented 3 things of significance. A sustained and extensive communication history with Sloane spanning 14 months, not 8. A series of messages with a man named Derek Holt, which Miles identified as a potential bridge financing contact Garrett had been developing outside the formal Hartwell structure. And the detail that made Miles's professionally neutral voice carry a very specific undercurrent, a thread of emails in which Garrett had been attempting to negotiate a restructuring of the Hartwell partnership, specifically to reduce the equity stake of the Ashworth subsidiary, which he had apparently decided was too large. He had been trying to push Caroline's family out of his deal. While married to Caroline, without knowing that the Ashworth representative he was emailing was a direct report of Miles Hartley. Dorothy called at 8:30. He's not very smart, she said. And for the first time in 3 days, Caroline laughed. It was a short laugh, and it surprised her, and it felt like something cracking open in a good way. No, she said, he's really not. 3 in the morning, not peaceful silence, the other kind, the kind with texture and weight. Nora had gone home at 11 to get clothes and sleep in her own bed for a few hours. The hotel room was very quiet. Caroline had turned off the overhead light and left the bathroom light on, with the door cracked, the way she had slept since childhood, when she did not want complete darkness. She had been managing. For 4 days she had been managing. The calls with Dorothy and Miles, the legal decisions, the documentation, the practical architecture of dismantling a marriage while simultaneously being 8 months pregnant in a hotel room. She had been competent and composed and had made every decision with clarity. Now it was 3 in the morning, and she was alone, and she stopped managing. She cried, not with speeches or realizations, just quietly, in the dark, with both hands on her stomach, for a long time, the kind of crying that is not about any single thing, but about the accumulated weight of all the things together. The marriage she had believed in, the years she had spent adjusting herself to fit inside it, the kitchen floor, the click of the door, the voicemail about Thursday's dinner. She cried until she was done. Then she lay still and looked at the strip of bathroom light on the ceiling and breathed. I wanted a family, she thought. That is all I wanted. I wanted a table with people around it. I wanted someone who chose me. Not the money, not the name, not what I represented. Just me. I wanted to be chosen by someone who knew me. He didn't choose me. He chose what I could give him. And I let him do that because I was so determined to prove that I could live on love alone. That I didn't need Dorothy's world or the estate or the money or any of it. That I was just a woman who fell in love and made it work. I was so certain. I was absolutely, completely certain. She paused. Then, I wasn't stupid. I was hopeful. And I was 25. And he was dishonest. These are not the same failure. I do not owe myself contempt for having been 25 and hopeful. She picked up her phone. She opened the browser. She typed, "Can a pregnant woman file for divorce?" She read for a while. She closed the browser. She opened it again. She typed, "What does a protective order cover?" She read that too. She closed it. She sat with the phone in her hands for a moment. Then she typed, "Signs of emotional abuse in marriage." She started reading. She got halfway down the list. She stopped, not because it was wrong, because it was exactly right. Every item, the minimizing, the gaslighting, the way her own perceptions had been systematically undermined until she had stopped trusting them, the way she had apologized for things she had not done wrong, the way she had learned to read his moods at the door each evening before she could know what version of the night it was going to be. All of it, every single one. She put the phone face down on the blanket. The baby moved. Not a little kick. A full, deliberate, unmistakable movement, like a hand pressing from the inside saying, "I am here. I am right here." Hi, Caroline thought. I know. I'm right here. She put both hands over the movement and stayed very still. After a while, she got up and ran a bath. Not hot. She had been careful about temperature for 8 months, but warm enough to matter. She lowered herself in slowly and sat in the water for a long time, not doing anything. The hotel bathroom was generic and fluorescent, and she did not care. She rested her head against the rim and looked at her stomach rising above the water, the round, solid certainty of it. We're going to be okay, she thought. I don't know the exact shape of okay yet. I don't know the logistics or the timing or how any of it unfolds, but we are going to be okay. I know this the same way I know her heartbeat. Some things you just know. Starting over feels impossible, she thought, but staying feels worse. It has always felt worse. I just would not let myself finish that sentence before tonight. She had finished it now. Her father called at 7 in the morning. Preston Ashworth was not a man who called without a reason. He was not a man who called with feelings. He had spent most of Caroline's life at a careful distance from the complicated business of being emotionally present, and she had spent most of her adult life making peace with that fact. He said, "I'm driving up from Charleston. I'll be there by lunch. Don't argue with me." She said, "I'm not going to argue with you, Dad." "Good." A pause. "The baby okay?" "She's okay." "Good." His voice did something then, tightened, then released, like a door being opened that had been stuck. "I should have been more present. When you were deciding about Garrett, I should have—" "Dad," she said, "you can say all of that when you get here, okay?" A pause. Okay, Caroline. Nora came back at 8 with an overnight bag and a breakfast sandwich and the correct energy, which was no drama, just presence. She sat on the bed and ate her own sandwich and let Caroline eat hers without turning it into a moment. After a while, Nora said, "You know, I never liked him. From the very first time I met him, I thought he was a salesman, not a real estate salesman, a man who was always selling something." "Why didn't you tell me?" Caroline asked. "Because you were happy, or you looked happy." "And what was I going to say? I have a feeling about this man? You would have told me I was wrong." "I would have," Caroline said. "Definitely. And then I would have been your maid of honor anyway, because that's what friends do." "Yeah. I'm sorry I was right." "Me too." They sat quietly for a moment. Outside the window, the morning was gray and ordinary and completely indifferent to all of it, which was somehow comforting. At noon, Miles arrived with Preston. Preston walked into the hotel room and looked at his daughter, really looked at her. His eyes moved to her face. The mark had faded from purple to a greenish yellow spread across her cheekbone, and something happened in his expression that Caroline had not seen from him since she was 11 years old. He crossed the room without speaking and put his arms around her, carefully. One arm around her shoulders. Mindful of the pregnancy, his hand at the back of her head. He had not done this in more than 15 years. She had not known she was still waiting for it. He said, into her hair, in a voice that was not entirely steady, "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." She knew he didn't mean the hotel. She leaned against him and let herself be held for just a moment. One moment. Then she straightened and said, "Okay, tell me what Miles has." Preston almost smiled. He sat down. Miles set the folder on the table. They had a lot to discuss. The sound of a phone ringing, then a receptionist, then hold music, then a different voice saying the same thing the first voice had said, which was a version of "Not today, Mr. Whitfield." Garrett Whitfield was having a very bad week. This was not a chapter Caroline witnessed directly. She pieced it together from Miles's reports and Henry's particular talent for knowing things, and it arrived to her in fragments that she assembled without satisfaction and without guilt. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired and clear-eyed, which was better. The bridge financing applications had all been declined. 2 banks had cited strategic relationship concerns, which, in banking, translated with precision to the Ashworths, have accounts here, and we have made our priorities clear. The 3rd bank had simply not called back, which was, in its way, more eloquent. Without the bridge financing, the Hartwell project's capital timeline collapsed. The development required $50 million within 45 days, or the entire project defaulted. 4 years of work. The thing that was supposed to make Garrett Whitfield a serious man in serious rooms. His construction partner, Meridian Build, had requested a review meeting. Clifford Pruitt had gone quiet in the specific way of men who calculate risk and recalculate it and then stop returning calls. Sloan Mercer had left the house, and Caroline had not come back. These things together were communicating something to Garrett that he was not yet able to fully process, because processing it would require understanding the scope of what he had done and what he had not known, and what those 2 things together meant for the next several decades of his life. He was not there yet. He was still in the stage of believing that if he could speak to Caroline directly, he could manage it. He came to the hotel on a Wednesday afternoon. He brought expensive flowers. He had rehearsed. He did not get to Caroline. Miles Hartley met him in the lobby. Caroline watched from the mezzanine. She stood at the railing with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder, and she looked down at the lobby and watched her husband encounter, for what appeared to be The first time in his life, a conversation he could not redirect. She watched Miles introduce himself. She watched Garrett's expression when he understood who Miles was. She watched him look around the lobby as if searching. Searching for her, she understood, because even now the solution in his mind was her face, her voice, her compliance. She did not go down. I used to go to him, she thought, every single time, even when I was the one who'd been hurt, especially then. I would go to him and smooth it over and make the problem smaller so we could both pretend it wasn't the size it was. I'm not going to him. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. She went back to the conference room. Henry Ashworth arrived that evening from New York. He was 33 and had Dorothy's eyes and the energy of a man who had been waiting a long time for permission to be useful. He walked into the conference room and looked at Caroline and looked at the faded mark on her face and said, "Tell me what you need." "I need someone to go to the house and get my mother's ring," Caroline said. "It's in a velvet pouch in the top drawer of the nightstand on my side. I'll have it by morning." "Shing," Henry said. He was good for his word. The ring arrived at 8:15 the next day, the sapphire cold and familiar in her palm. She had not realized how much she had missed holding it. Miles returned from the lobby meeting and sat across from Caroline at the conference table. "Garrett has retained counsel," he said. "A firm called Decker and Shaw." He paused, allowing the significance of that pause to be its own sentence. He passed along a message. He said he loves you. He said, everything can be worked out. Caroline looked at the ring in her hand. "I'm not the same woman he hit in that kitchen," she thought. "I know that sounds like something people say. I know it sounds like the line from a particular kind of story, but it is just simply true. I am not her anymore. I don't know exactly when the shift happened, the hospital, the hotel, the 3 a.m. bathroom, the phone call with Dorothy, the moment I watched him in the lobby and did not go down. Oh, some combination of all of those. But I am not going to him, and I am not smoothing this over, and I am not going to spend one more day being the woman who made herself small enough to fit inside his idea of a wife." She put her mother's ring on her right hand. It fit perfectly. Her fingers had gone back to their normal size in the last week, and it slid on as if it had been waiting. "Tell Decker and Shaw that we'll schedule a formal meeting," she said. "Through proper channels, when we're ready." "Of course," Miles said. She stood up. She was 31 weeks pregnant, and she stood with her whole body straight and grounded, and she said, "I'm going to the estate tomorrow. I think it's time." Preston looked up from his papers. Something moved through his expression, something that might have been relief or pride or both. "I'll drive you," he said. The solid, final sound of documents being filed, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The divorce filing and protective order became part of the public record on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Clifford Pruitt had told his wife. By Friday, the shape of it had moved through the particular social geography of Connecticut real estate in the way that all things eventually do when they are true and significant and involve money. Caroline was at the Ashworth estate by then. The guest house sat at the edge of the formal garden, a converted carriage house with wide windows and a fireplace that the housekeeper had lit before Caroline arrived. It smelled like wood smoke and the linen spray Dorothy's staff had used for as long as Caroline could remember. She had stood in the doorway of the guest house with her bag on her shoulder and breathed it in. Home, some part of her said. She had been here before. She had been here many times. She had never let herself call it that. Dorothy came to the guest house that evening. She did not make an event of the arrival. She knocked, came in when invited, sat in the armchair by the window, and looked at Caroline for a moment, with the specific attention she gave to things she considered important. "You look better," Dorothy said. "I feel better." "The estate agrees with you. It always did." They sat together for a while. Dorothy had brought tea, and the particular shortbread the estate kitchen had made for as long as Caroline could remember, thin and buttery, with a line of dark chocolate along the bottom. Caroline ate 3 of them without counting. "The Hartwell situation is moving forward," Dorothy said. "Miles will have a full update by morning." "I know. Garrett's attorneys have been in contact with ours. They appear to be advising acceptance of terms." "I know that too." Dorothy looked at her. "You're not asking questions." "I trust Miles," Caroline said, "and I trust you. And I'm 31 weeks pregnant, and I would like to eat shortbread in front of a fire without thinking about Garrett Whitfield for at least one evening." Dorothy's expression did something it did not often do. It softened, just slightly, just enough. "Fair enough," she said. The formal meeting happened 10 days later. Miles had selected a conference room in a Hartford law building, neutral territory. A room with no Ashworth history. Caroline wore a dark blue dress and her mother's ring on her right hand, and she walked in with Miles on one side and Henry on the other, and she sat down across from Garrett and his attorney, and she kept her hands still on the table. Garrett looked bad. Not disheveled. He would not allow himself that. But diminished. The specific diminishment of a structure whose foundation has been quietly compromised. He was still wearing the same kind of suit. He was still holding himself with the posture of a man who expected rooms to accommodate him. But something underneath it had shifted. He looked at her. His eyes moved to her face, to the ring on her right hand, to her stomach. Something moved through his expression. She did not try to name it. "Caroline," he said. "I'm going to let Miles guide the meeting," she said pleasantly. She folded her hands on the table. Miles placed a summary document in front of Garrett's attorney. He explained the Ashworth Industries connection to Hartwell. He explained the debt exposure in Caroline's name. He explained the documentation from Sloan Mercer's photographs of the second phone. He explained the protective order. He explained the divorce filing. Garrett's attorney read the document. His face did not change. His pen stopped moving. Garrett's face changed. It moved through several things in approximately 4 seconds. Confusion, then calculation, then the specific expression of a man understanding that the reality he has been operating inside was not the reality that existed. He said, slowly, "You're an Ashworth." "I always was," Caroline said. "You told me. I told you my grandmother and I were estranged. That was true for a period. I told you I didn't access the trust. That was also true, while I chose not to." She paused. "You never asked further questions." He never asked, she thought. In 3 years, not once did he ask about my family with genuine curiosity. He asked about the money once and accepted complicated as the answer, because complicated meant not immediately useful. He never wanted to know where I came from. He never wanted to know what I wanted to become. He wanted to use me, and he wanted me to be grateful, and he wanted me to be small enough to fit the space he had designated. He never loved me. He loved what I represented, and he didn't even bother to find out what I actually was. "The terms are what they are," Miles said, with the finality of someone who has said everything that needs saying. "We're prepared to move forward." Garrett looked at Caroline. She held his gaze. He opened his mouth to say something. She could see it forming, the appeal, the negotiation, the attempt to find the version of her that used to be accessible to that tone of voice. "I'm going to let Miles handle everything from here," she said. "That's all I have for today." She stood up. She was 32 weeks pregnant. and she stood with her whole body, and she left the conference room, and she did not look back. The drive back to the estate was quiet. Henry drove. Preston sat in the passenger seat. Caroline sat in the back and watched the Connecticut trees through the window, bare and structural against the late November sky. "It's done," she said to Preston when they pulled into the estate drive. He nodded. He didn't add anything to it. Dorothy was in the sitting room. She did not get up. Her knees had been making their opinions known for 3 years. But she held out both hands when Caroline crossed the room. Caroline took them. Dorothy's hands were dry and cool and had the particular grip of someone who had held on to many things that mattered. "How do you feel?" Dorothy asked. Caroline thought about it honestly, not the answer that sounded good, the true one. "Like I set down something very heavy," she said. Dorothy squeezed her hands. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what it feels like." That night, Caroline reorganized the guest house closet. It did not need organizing. She did it anyway. Refolded everything, grouped by color, straightened every hanger until they were evenly spaced. It took 2 hours. When she finished, she sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet room. She was not crying. She was not numb. She was simply present in a way that she had not been for a very long time. The particular presence of an unclenched fist. The fireplace had burned down to embers. Outside the window, the garden was dark and bare and structured. The estate was absolutely quiet. She put both hands on her stomach and sat with the quiet for a while. This, she thought, is what peace feels like. I had forgotten. A baby's heartbeat on a monitor. Strong and steady and rhythmic. The most hopeful sound in the world. 4 weeks had passed. It was early December at the Ashworth estate. And Caroline was 36 weeks pregnant and had spent a month in the careful, deliberate work of reassembling herself. She walked every morning. The formal gardens in December were bare in the way that made their underlying structure visible. The geometry of the paths, the architecture of the hedges, the bones of it all. She found this beautiful. She had not expected to. She had always associated the estate gardens with the pressure of the Ashworth name, with the weight of expectation and legacy. Now she walked through them and thought, this is just a place. A beautiful, well-made place. It does not require anything from me that I do not choose to give. She called Nora every night. Sometimes they talked for an hour. Sometimes 15 minutes. Nora had opinions about everything and expressed them with precision and humor, and Carolyn laughed more than she had in years. She had dinner with her father 3 times, real dinners, in the main house dining room, with the long table that had seemed so imposing when she was a child, and the candles Dorothy always kept lit, and the food that the estate kitchen produced with offhand excellence. She and Preston ate and talked. Carefully at first, then less carefully. He told her things he had not told her before. About her mother, who had died when Caroline was 7, about why he had stepped back from the company, about the second divorce, which he described with the resigned clarity of a man who has finally understood his own patterns. She listened. She asked questions. He answered them. They were becoming, slowly and imperfectly, something they had not quite been before. She heard from Miles that Decker and Shaw had advised Garrett to accept all terms. The details were handled without requiring her direct involvement in the daily negotiations. Garrett had signed the debt unwinding documentation. The Hartwell project had been restructured. His ownership stake was significantly reduced. He had moved to a rented apartment in Hartford. Caroline received this information with a steadiness that surprised even her. Not coldness, not satisfaction of the sharp kind, just a settled acknowledgement that the right things were happening in the right direction. One morning, a letter arrived from Sloane Mercer. It was handwritten on plain notepaper, short and imperfect, and genuine. It said that Sloane had been thinking about the conversation they'd had on the phone. It said she kept thinking about a woman who drove herself to the emergency room. It said, "You are more than you let him make you think you were." I hope you know that. Caroline read it twice. She didn't fully forgive the situation. The situation was too complicated for the simple architecture of forgiveness. But she kept the letter. She put it in the folder with her mother's ring receipt and the resource list Dr. Crane had given her in the hospital. Things she might want to look at someday. Things that had been part of how she got here. Dorothy requested a meeting in the library. This was not unusual. Dorothy held meetings in the library the way other people had conversations. The library was her room. 12-foot ceilings, the smell of old paper, 2 fireplaces, a desk that had been in the family since 1940. Caroline sat in the chair across from Dorothy's desk. Dorothy had tea already poured. "I want to talk about the company," Dorothy said. "I know. Not about obligation, not about what you owe it or what it owes you. I want to know what you want." Caroline had been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it since the hotel, really, since the night she had sat with C. Ashworth on the keycard sleeve and understood that the name had been there the whole time, waiting. "The hospitality division," she said. "It's been managed well, but conservatively. I've been looking at the portfolio, and I think there's significant room for repositioning. The experiential market has changed, and our properties haven't kept pace with where our clients are going. I want to actually do the work, not inherit a title. Do the work." Dorothy was quiet, not the evaluating quiet, the satisfied quiet. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. "Specifically that." "You were testing me again," Caroline said. "I was listening," Dorothy said, with the precision of a woman who knew the difference. "There's a board meeting on January 12th. There will be a position announced. I would like you in the room." "I'll be there," Caroline said. She walked home through the garden afterward. The afternoon light was thin and pale, December doing what December did. The gravel path crunched under her boots. The baby moved in a slow, rolling way that had become familiar and comforting. She was not thinking about Garrett. She noticed this because she had spent 3 years thinking about Garrett, anticipating him, managing him, interpreting him, and the absence of that constant background work was something she was still adjusting to. Like a noise that had stopped, she was thinking about the January board meeting, about the hospitality portfolio, about 3 specific properties she had been researching for the past 2 weeks, lying in bed in the guest house with her laptop, filling a notebook with observations and questions and ideas. She was thinking about her grandmother, who had built an empire from a single hotel in Charleston, with borrowed money and absolute refusal. She was thinking about her daughter. She walked to the far end of a garden, where the stone bench was, the one that looked out over the winter lawn and the bare tree line and the particular December sky of the Connecticut coast, and she sat down. The understanding arrived without ceremony. The estate, the company, the name. She had told herself for years that these were a cage, that choosing them meant becoming her grandmother, powerful and alone, attended by staff and lawyers and the constant machinery of an empire, with no one who chose her simply for herself. She had run from all of it to find love, to find being chosen. But the estate had not been a cage. The money had not been a cage. Dorothy's world had not been a cage. It had been a foundation she had mistaken for a weight. She had been the one who built the cage. Her own fear of becoming someone formidable, her own terror of being alone at the top of something. She had chosen Garrett, not despite his smallness, but because of it. Because a man who needed her to be small felt safer than a life that asked her to be large. The prison door had been unlocked the whole time. She sat with that for a while. The cold was coming in through her coat, but she didn't get up yet. She pressed her palm to her stomach. I'm going to tell you about this someday, she thought, when you're old enough to hear it. I'm going to tell you about the year I came home, about your great-grandmother who tested men with money and waited 3 years with extraordinary patience, about the friend who brought shortbread cookies to a hotel room at midnight, about your grandfather who drove from Charleston and said, I should have gotten here sooner, about the woman you're named for, who was difficult and built things and had no interest in being small. I'm going to tell you all of it. And I'm going to tell you that none of it, not one single piece of it, was wasted. Because it led here. Because it led to this bench and this garden and this January board meeting and you. She stood up. She brushed the cold from her coat. She walked back to the guest house through the bare garden, her boots on the gravel, the winter sky enormous above her. Preston was at the gate. He had brought coffee from the estate kitchen in a paper cup from the bakery in the village, the same bakery that had been there since Caroline was 16. He had called someone to find out if it was still the right one, which meant he had thought about it, which meant he had been paying attention. This was his language. They walked together. He talked about her mother, how she had loved the estate in winter, how she had always claimed the bare trees were more interesting than the full ones, because you could see the real structure. Caroline listened and did not hurry him. By the time they reached the guest house door, the light was going and the estate lamps were coming on, and Caroline felt something she hadn't felt in this place in a very long time, like she belonged here. Not because she was supposed to, not because it was inherited or expected, but because she had chosen it, eyes open, knowing exactly what she was choosing. The particular silence of a house that has just become a home. Then, distantly, the first cry of a newborn finding her voice in the world. Margaret Ashworth was born on December 27th, one day before her due date, at 6:42 in the morning. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces. She had her mother's coloring, dark hair, pale skin, and an expression in those first extraordinary minutes of profound assessment, as if she was surveying the room and finding it adequate for her purposes. Caroline held her for the first time and felt something so large and so simple that she did not try to put words to it. She just looked at her daughter's face, the whole face, every detail of it. Hi, she thought. There you are. I have been waiting for you. Preston was in the waiting room with Henry. He had been there for 11 hours. When the nurse came out, he stood up so fast he nearly knocked over the coffee he had been holding. Henry caught it. Nora was in the hallway, having been given the dignified task of waiting outside the delivery room, which she had accomplished with characteristic energy by texting approximately 40 people the moment Margaret arrived, updating a running commentary that she had been maintaining for 11 hours with the dedication of someone covering breaking news. She came in first. She looked at Margaret for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "She looks like she already knows things." "She might," Caroline said. "I'm going to be insufferable about this baby," Nora said. "I want to be transparent about that up front." "I know. Like genuinely insufferable. Photos constantly. Opinions about everything. The whole thing. I know, Nora. Okay. Just so we're clear." She sat down beside the bed and looked at Margaret again, with the expression of someone who has just understood something about themselves. She's so small. She's 7 pounds. She's tiny, She's perfect. Don't argue with me. Dorothy sent flowers that afternoon. They arrived in an arrangement so large it required 2 people to carry it through the door. White peonies, not seasonal, which meant she had sourced them from somewhere that required either significant expense or significant insistence. And in Dorothy's case, it was usually both. The card was typed, not handwritten, because Dorothy had always typed her cards. It said, "Welcome, Margaret Ashworth. The door is always open." D.A. Preston came in and sat by the bed for a while. He held his granddaughter with the surprised care of a man who had not held a newborn in nearly 30 years. He looked at Margaret's face for a long time. He said quietly, "She looks like your mother." Caroline looked at him. He had said this before she could. "She does," Caroline said softly. Preston held Margaret a little longer. His eyes were doing something that Preston Ashworth's eyes did not typically do, which was reflect that anything was happening inside him. Caroline let him have that without comment. He handed Margaret back carefully. He straightened. He cleared his throat. He said, "Dorothy said the board meeting is January 12th. I know. I'll be there." Caroline looked at him. "You don't have to." "I'll be there," he said again, quietly, without negotiation. She nodded. Dorothy arrived on the second day. She came in the afternoon, when the hospital was quieter, which was not an accident. She had a driver and a cashmere coat and the posture of a woman who had walked into rooms she owned for 60 years. She sat in the chair beside the bed. The nurse brought Margaret in from the bassinet. Dorothy held out her arms and received the baby with the matter-of-fact care of someone who had always known how to hold things without dropping them. She looked down at Margaret for a long time. Her face did something that Caroline had seen once or twice in her life and never taken for granted. It opened, just slightly, just enough to see inside. "She looks like your mother," Dorothy said. "That's the second time someone has said that today," Caroline said, "because it's true." Dorothy looked at the baby for another moment. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. She died too young for you to know her properly. That is one of the great losses of your life." She paused. "Margaret will know who she was named for. I will make sure of it." Carolyn looked at her grandmother. At the curve of her bent over her great-granddaughter, at the extraordinary permanence of her, this woman who had built things and refused things and waited with absolute patience for the world to catch up to what she already knew. "Thank you," Caroline said, "for all of it, the 3 years of waiting, the Hartwell investment, the door not closing." Dorothy looked up. "You don't thank family for being family," she said. "You simply continue." She held Margaret a little longer. Then she handed her back and straightened her spine and said, with the precision of someone for whom transitions were always deliberate, "The board has an opening in the hospitality division. January 12th. There will be a presentation component." "I'm ready for it," Caroline said. Dorothy looked at her. "I know," she said. "That's why I scheduled it." Nora came back that evening with the ugly stuffed elephant, enormous and gray and vaguely optimistic in its expression, which she had purchased from the hospital gift shop with the confidence of someone making a very good decision. "She'll love it," Nora said, placing it in the bassinet with ceremony. "She's 2 days old. She'll love it eventually. I'm playing a long game to bum." She settled on the edge of the bed and looked at the bassinet, and then at Caroline, and said, in a different voice, the real one underneath the one she usually used, "You look good. Like, genuinely good. Not performing good. Actually good." "I am," Caroline said. "Actually. Yeah." Nora nodded. "I can tell." They sat together for a while. The hospital room was warm and the lights were low, and Margaret was sleeping with the absolute commitment of someone with nothing on her schedule and no unresolved feelings. Outside the window, snow had been falling since afternoon, not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind. Fine and steady, accumulating on the window ledge, on the parking lot below, on all the ordinary surfaces of the ordinary world, turning everything gently white. "So," Nora said, eventually, "what comes next?" Caroline thought about the January board meeting, about the hospitality portfolio and the 3 properties she had been studying, and the notebook full of ideas on the desk in the guest house. She thought about her father saying, "I'll be there." She thought about Dorothy saying, "You simply continue." She thought about walking through the winter garden and understanding that the thing she had been running from was the foundation she had always needed. She thought about Margaret. Sleeping 3 feet away, 7 pounds and 2 ounces of beginning. "Now," Caroline said, "I go home." Nora smiled. "You've been home." "I know," Caroline said. "I finally figured that out." Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, not the heavy kind, the quiet kind. The kind that does not announce itself, but simply arrives and keeps arriving. And by the time you look up, everything has been made clean and new and ready for what comes next. Margaret slept. Caroline watched the snow. For the first time in 3 years, she did not check her phone. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because anyone had placed her there, because she had chosen it. Eyes open, knowing the cost of what she had walked through to get here, and knowing, with the certainty of someone who had tested the knowledge and found it solid, that it was worth every single step. Some lessons only cost 3 years. Some lessons cost more. She had gotten off cheaply. She knew it. She would carry it. She would make sure her daughter never had to learn it the same way. Margaret Ashworth slept in her bassinet while the first snow of the winter turned the world outside the hospital window quiet and white and entirely new. And Caroline Ashworth, not Whitfield, not anymore, not ever again, held her mother's ring on her right hand and her daughter's future in both of them, and she let herself be, simply and completely, home. Closing disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, written, and edited by our team, crafted by hand to bring you stories with real meaning, real emotion, and lessons worth carrying. Thank you for being here.